It was a quiet evening in a suburban town. The streets were empty, the shops had already closed, and the streetlights gave the road a soft yellow glow. Two police officers, Daniel and Mark, were driving their patrol car back toward the station after finishing their routine checks. It had been a slow night. The radio had not buzzed for almost an hour, and both men thought it would be an uneventful shift. Daniel, who was behind the wheel, hummed a tune softly while Mark leaned back in his seat looking outside at the quiet streets. Neither of them expected anything unusual. But then, out of the shadows, something appeared suddenly in the middle of the road. Daniel slammed the brakes and the car came to a stop with a short screech of tires. Both men leaned forward at the same time, eyes wide. Standing right in front of their headlights was a German Shepherd. The dog was panting heavily, its coat was dirty, and its vest, yes, it had a police K9 vest, was torn on the side. For a moment, the two officers were frozen. It was not common to see a working dog alone, especially late at night. The dog barked once, loud and sharp, and then whined as if it was trying to speak. It paced in a circle and then stood still, staring directly at the two men inside the car. Daniel and Mark exchanged quick looks. "That's a K9, isn't it?" Daniel whispered. Mark nodded slowly. "Yeah, but where's the handler?" Before they could think further, the dog suddenly ran a few steps away from the car, then turned back, barking again. It was almost as if the dog was telling them to follow. When they did not move fast enough, the German Shepherd returned to the front of the car, blocking their way, and barked again. This time there was no mistaking the urgency in its eyes. Daniel opened his door cautiously. The cool night air rushed in as he stepped out. "Easy, boy," he said in a calm voice, holding out his hand. But the dog didn't come closer. Instead, it barked, turned around, and trotted a few steps down the street before stopping to look back at him. Mark got out from the other side. "This isn't normal," he said. "I think the dog's trying to lead us somewhere." The German Shepherd barked again and ran ahead, but only for a short distance. It kept stopping and turning back, making sure they were following. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard stories of dogs alerting people in emergencies, but never had he seen one so determined. The torn vest, the dirt on its fur, and the desperation in its behavior told him that something serious had happened. Without wasting more time, he nodded to his partner. "Let's go," Daniel said firmly. "We'll follow." The two officers got back into their car and slowly rolled forward, keeping their headlights on the dog. The German Shepherd ran ahead, but never too far. It moved with purpose, always checking to see that the police car was still behind. The streets began to change as they drove deeper into the older part of town. The well-lit roads gave way to dim alleys, and the silence grew heavier. The officers grew more uneasy with every turn. They noticed that the dog was limping slightly, but it never stopped. Whatever it wanted to show them must have been urgent enough for it to push through pain and exhaustion. Mark reached for the radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47, he said, his voice steady but cautious. "We've encountered a police K9 in distress. It seems to be leading us somewhere. Requesting backup," the radio crackled. "Copy that, Unit 47. Proceed with caution and keep us updated." Daniel tightened his grip on the wheel. Whatever happened, this dog must have seen it. And it came straight to us for help. That can't be a coincidence. After nearly 10 minutes of driving through unfamiliar back streets, the German Shepherd finally stopped at the edge of an abandoned construction site. The tall, unfinished buildings loomed in the darkness, their skeletal frames casting long shadows under the moonlight. The place looked deserted, with rusted fences and weeds growing through cracks in the ground. The dog barked furiously now, running back and forth near the entrance, scratching at the ground and whining. Its tail wagged nervously, not in joy but in agitation, like it was urging them to hurry. Daniel parked the car and stepped out, flashlight in hand. The moment his feet hit the ground, the atmosphere felt different. The night air seemed heavier, filled with tension. Mark joined him, scanning the area carefully. "Why here?" Mark muttered. The dog ran up to them and barked before darting inside the construction site. It was clear the animal wanted them to follow on foot. The two officers hesitated for a moment. They were trained to be careful, to never rush blindly into unknown places. But the dog's urgency and the strange situation gave them no choice. Daniel clicked on his flashlight, its bright beam cutting through the darkness. "Stay close," Daniel said to his partner. They stepped past the rusted fence, the crunch of gravel under their boots echoing in the silence. The German Shepherd guided them further inside, its nails tapping against concrete as it led the way. The deeper they went, the stronger the officers' instincts warned them that something wasn't right. The site had the eerie feeling of a place hiding secrets. They noticed fresh tire marks on the dirt road leading deeper into the site. That was unusual. No one was supposed to be here at this hour. Mark crouched for a closer look, his brow furrowed. "These are recent," he whispered. "Someone's been here tonight." The dog barked sharply, breaking the heavy silence, and ran toward a pile of debris near one of the unfinished buildings. It pawed at the ground and then looked back at them, whining in frustration. Daniel's pulse quickened. He swung his flashlight beam over the area and noticed something odd. Beneath the pile of wood and concrete blocks was a narrow, half-hidden passage leading underground. For a brief second, neither officer spoke. The dog barked again, louder, its body tense as if it knew what was inside. Mark looked at his partner. "This dog didn't run across town for nothing." Daniel nodded. His voice was low but firm. "We're going in." At that moment, the two officers realized their quiet shift had turned into something far greater than they had imagined. They didn't yet know what was waiting for them inside, but one thing was clear. The German Shepherd had brought them here for a reason, and judging by the urgency in its eyes, that reason was nothing ordinary. The German Shepherd's paws echoed against the cold concrete floor as it moved deeper into the abandoned construction site. Its breathing was heavy, but the urgency in its steps never slowed. The two police officers, Daniel and Mark, followed close behind with their flashlights in hand, the beam slicing through the darkness. Every shadow seemed alive in the eerie silence, and the only sounds were the crunch of their boots and the faint whine of the dog ahead. The half-hidden passage under the debris led them down a sloping path. Dust floated in the air and the scent of damp earth filled their lungs. Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine. This was no ordinary construction site. Someone had been here recently. He kept one hand near his holstered weapon, scanning every corner. Mark whispered, "Why would a police K9 end up here alone? And why lead us here of all places?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He just kept moving forward, his flashlight beam steady. Finally, he said, "Whatever's down here, it's not good. The dog wouldn't have risked its life to bring us here unless it was serious." The passage opened into a wide underground chamber that looked like a basement. Broken planks, scattered tools, and rusted barrels lay across the floor. It was dark, damp, and unsettling. The dog stopped near the center, barking toward one side of the room. Its tail was stiff and its ears were sharp, ready for anything. The officers exchanged a glance. Daniel adjusted his radio and spoke in a low voice. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. We're inside an abandoned construction site off Millstone Avenue. We've found what looks like an underground structure. Requesting backup immediately." The reply came through static. "Copy, Unit 47, backup en route. Proceed with caution," Mark sighed. "I don't like this. We shouldn't be down here without backup." But the dog barked louder, pawing at a rusted metal door at the far end of the chamber. The scratches on the door looked fresh, as if the animal had tried to claw its way through earlier. Daniel stepped forward cautiously and pulled the handle. It creaked loudly, resisting at first before giving way with a groan. The beam of their flashlights revealed a narrow hallway stretching further underground. The walls were rough concrete, damp with moisture. The officers felt the tension rise with each step. The German Shepherd ran ahead a few feet, then stopped, looking back to make sure they were following. As they walked, Daniel noticed tire marks leading into the hall, the kind that would be left by a small cart or vehicle. Nearby, footprints in the dust caught his attention. Some were large, others small, too many for just one or two people. His stomach tightened. "Looks like a lot of activity down here," he muttered. Mark's jaw clenched. This isn't just an abandoned site. Something's going on. The dog suddenly barked again and sprinted to the end of the hallway where another door stood slightly ajar. Faint noises drifted from the other side, muffled voices, shuffling, and something like a groan. The officers froze. Their hearts pounded in the silence. They looked at each other, both pale under the flashlight glow. "You hear that?" Mark whispered. Daniel nodded slowly. "We're not alone." The German Shepherd pressed its body against the door, whining softly now. It pawed at the floor, its tail lowered, its eyes fixed on what lay beyond. Daniel raised a hand, signaling for silence. He took slow, steady breaths as he moved closer. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing on his shoulders. Whatever was behind that door, It was what the dog had been trying to show them all along. He glanced at Mark. "On 3, he mouthed. Mark nodded, raising his flashlight in one hand, the other steady and ready. Daniel counted silently. 1, 2, 3. He pushed the door open with force, and the room beyond lit up under their flashlights. At first, all they saw was clutter, tables, chairs, scattered boxes. But then the beams landed on figures. Several people were huddled in the corner, tied to chairs with ropes, their mouths gagged. Their eyes widened in fear and relief as the light hit them. Some struggled weakly, trying to make noise through the gags. Mark gasped, "Hostages." But before they could rush forward, a loud crash echoed from deeper inside the room. Something metallic hit the ground. The officers swung their flashlights toward the noise. There were more shadows moving in the far end, disappearing quickly into another doorway. Whoever had been here was still around, and they had just realized they were discovered. The German shepherd barked furiously, running straight toward one of the hostages. It nudged against a man whose uniform was torn and bloodied. Daniel's eyes widened as he recognized the badge barely hanging from the man's chest. "It's an officer," he shouted. The man was weak, barely conscious, but his eyes flickered open. His lips moved behind the gag, trying to form words. Daniel and Mark quickly untied him, removing the gag. The injured man coughed, his voice hoarse. "They ambushed us, my team. They're dangerous. Still here." Daniel felt his blood run cold. Whoever they were, they had attacked police officers, taken hostages, and set up a hidden operation in this abandoned site. And now, thanks to the dog, their secret had been uncovered. Mark quickly moved to untie the other hostages who were frightened but alive. The dog stayed close to its handler, licking his face gently, whining with relief. The injured officer weakly lifted his hand to touch the dog's head. You made it," he whispered. "I knew you would." But before the moment could settle, another sound ripped through the silence. A loud bang, like a door being slammed shut somewhere nearby. Heavy footsteps followed, echoing against the concrete walls. Daniel straightened immediately. "They're still here," he said sharply. Mark glanced at him, tension in his eyes. "We need backup now." Daniel raised his radio again, speaking quickly. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. We have multiple hostages, one officer down, and suspects still on site. Send all available units immediately." The radio crackled. "Copy, Unit 47, backup 2 minutes out." "Hold position." But Daniel knew 2 minutes could feel like forever in a place like this. The dog growled low, ears pinned back, staring at the dark hallway. It sensed danger approaching. The officers positioned themselves defensively near the hostages, flashlights aimed at the doorway. The faint echo of footsteps grew louder, then stopped suddenly. The silence that followed was even more unnerving. Mark whispered, "They're watching us." Daniel didn't respond. He just tightened his grip, scanning the shadows. The German shepherd stood like a soldier, its body tense, ready to protect its handler and anyone else in danger. Then in the distance, sirens wailed faintly. Backup was on its way. But inside that underground chamber, with frightened hostages and an injured officer, Daniel and Mark knew the next moments could change everything. The German shepherd stepped forward, barking once more as if declaring it would face whatever came next. And in that tense silence, both officers realized this was only the beginning of what the dog had brought them into. The silence inside the underground room felt heavier than the concrete walls themselves. Daniel and Mark stood alert, their flashlights steady, their ears straining to catch the faintest sound. The hostages huddled together in the corner, still shaking from fear. The injured officer leaned weakly against the wall, breathing hard. And at the center of it all, the German shepherd stood tall, its eyes locked on the dark hallway, its body stiff like a soldier ready for battle. Every second felt stretched. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of sirens grew louder. But they were not close enough yet. Daniel knew backup was on its way, but he also knew they might have to face danger before help arrived. Mark whispered, "They're still here." "I can feel it." Daniel nodded slowly, his jaw set. "Stay sharp. Don't let them catch us off guard." The dog growled low, its fur bristling, ears twitching at every faint noise. Suddenly, a faint metallic sound echoed again, like a chain being dragged across the floor. The officers turned their flashlights quickly toward the sound, but the hallway remained empty, only shadows dancing along the walls. The injured officer coughed, his voice hoarse but urgent. Careful. They're armed. They planned everything. It's not just one or two of them. Daniel crouched beside him for a moment, speaking softly. We'll get you and the others out. Just hold on. The officer's hand trembled as he gripped Daniel's sleeve. It was an ambush. They wanted information. We resisted. They didn't expect him. He gestured weakly toward the German Shepherd. To escape. He saved me. He saved them all. His voice cracked with emotion, but before Daniel could ask more, the dog barked suddenly, sharp and loud. Both officers jumped back into position, flashlights up. At the far end of the hallway, a shadow flickered. Someone was there, just out of reach of the light. Daniel steadied his voice. Police! Step forward with your hands up! There was no reply. The silence stretched again, broken only by the nervous breathing of the hostages. Then the shadow moved away quickly, disappearing deeper into the passage. They're trying to stall us, Mark muttered. Or trap us. Daniel's mind raced. They couldn't abandon the hostages, but they also couldn't let whoever was still here escape before backup arrived. The dog whined softly, pawing the ground, torn between staying with the hostages and chasing after the shadow. Not yet. Boy, Daniel whispered, gently resting a hand on the dog's back. Then, from another corner of the basement, a new sound made everyone freeze. A faint cry, weak and muffled, almost too soft to hear. The hostages looked at each other in confusion. Mark swung his flashlight toward the sound and spotted a small door half hidden behind stacks of wooden crates. The cry came again, fragile and desperate. There's more, Mark said quickly. Someone else is trapped. Daniel's heart pounded. How many people were being kept here? He gave Mark a sharp nod. Check it. I'll cover you. The dog barked once, as if agreeing, then dashed toward the door with Mark close behind. It scratched furiously at the crates, whining louder with each second. Together, Mark and the dog pushed the crates aside, revealing the hidden door. It was locked with a heavy chain. Mark raised his voice. We've got more victims behind this. Daniel's flashlight swept across the room again, his nerves tight. We don't have the key, he called back. The injured officer struggled to sit up. One of the men. He carries it, Daniel cursed under his breath. Whoever had disappeared into the hallway must have had it. Time was slipping away, and the cries behind the door were growing weaker. The dog barked in frustration, then suddenly bolted toward the dark hallway, ignoring Daniel's call. Wait, Daniel shouted, but the dog was already gone, its paws pounding against the concrete. For a moment, fear gripped Daniel. The loyal canine was running straight into danger. But seconds later, a sharp yelp echoed through the passage, followed by a furious snarl. Mark's face went pale. He's got them cornered. Daniel knew they couldn't wait. He charged into the hallway, flashlight bouncing against the walls, Mark right behind him. The air grew colder as they went deeper. The snarls and barks grew louder until finally, the beam of light caught a scene that froze them both. The German Shepherd had leapt onto a man, pinning him to the ground. The suspect struggled desperately, trying to push the dog off, but the animal held firm, growling with controlled strength. The man's hand clutched something shiny, keys dangling from a chain. Police. Don't move, Daniel barked. He and Mark rushed forward, weapons trained. The suspect froze under the combined force of the dog and the officers. Daniel kicked the keys out of the man's hand and secured him quickly with handcuffs. Mark exhaled hard. Good boy, he said breathlessly, patting the dog's back. The German Shepherd wagged its tail once but kept its eyes sharp, still alert to every sound. They hurried back with the keys, unlocked the chained door, and pulled it open. Inside were two more people, shaken, exhausted, but alive. Their eyes filled with relief as the officers guided them out. Daniel's heart twisted as he looked around. This was far bigger than they had imagined. Not just one or two hostages, but many. And if the dog hadn't led them here, these people might never have been found. But the danger was not over. From above, faint footsteps echoed, heavier this time. The backup sirens outside were closer now, but so were the criminals. Whoever else had been here was moving and not away. They were repositioning. The injured officer spoke again, his voice strained. They won't leave. They don't want to get caught. Be ready. The dog barked sharply, running to the stairwell that led upward. It paced at the bottom step, its body tense. The officers exchanged a glance. Both were pale, sweat forming on their brows. Daniel muttered, This isn't just about hostages. Something bigger is going on. Mark tightened his grip on his weapon, and we're standing right in the middle of it. The German shepherd barked again, louder this time, as if telling them that the real battle was just about to begin. The stairwell loomed ahead like the entrance to another world, darker and more dangerous than the underground rooms they had just searched. The German shepherd stood at the base, barking sharply, its tail stiff, its ears pointed forward. The dog's instincts were screaming that the danger was above, waiting for them. Daniel and Mark knew it too. They exchanged a quick look, both pale but steady. Their training told them to wait for backup, but the cries of the rescued hostages and the presence of the injured officer reminded them that time was short. If the criminals upstairs tried to escape, they could lose their only chance to stop whatever operation was hidden here. Daniel's voice was low but firm. "We hold the line until backup arrives, but if they come down here, we meet them head-on." Mark nodded, though his hand trembled slightly as he adjusted his grip on his flashlight and weapon. The faint echo of footsteps above grew louder, then softer again, as if the suspects were circling. The uncertainty was the worst part. It was like being hunted in their own territory. The German shepherd paced restlessly, its nails clicking against the concrete floor. Every few seconds it looked back at its injured handler, as if torn between protecting him and charging into the fight. The bond between them was unshakable. Suddenly a loud crash echoed from above. Something heavy had been overturned, and the sound rolled through the stairwell like thunder. The hostages flinched, some of them covering their ears while the injured officer tried to calm them with weak words. Daniel raised his radio again, speaking quickly. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. Multiple suspects still on site. Hostages secured, but we need immediate tactical support. Situation is escalating." The reply came almost instantly. "Copy, Unit 47. Backup is seconds away. Soit en route. Hold tight." But before relief could settle, the first suspect appeared at the top of the stairwell. A tall figure stood in the shadows just out of reach of the flashlights. The man did not move forward, but his presence alone was threatening. The German shepherd growled low, stepping in front of Daniel and Mark, ready to defend. "Police!" Daniel shouted up the stairwell. "It's over. Drop whatever you're holding and come down with your hands up." The figure didn't reply. Instead, he stepped back into the darkness, his footsteps fading. The silence that followed was unnerving. "They're trying to buy time," Mark muttered. "Maybe they're destroying evidence." Daniel's mind raced. If this was part of a larger network, evidence could mean documents, computers, or even recordings hidden in this building. Losing it could cripple the entire case. He looked down at the injured officer who was still leaning against the wall, the German shepherd now returning to lick his face with concern. The man nodded weakly, whispering, "Don't let them get away. It's bigger than you think." Those words burned in Daniel's mind, bigger than they thought. This wasn't just a random crime scene. Then finally the distant sound of more sirens grew into a roar. Dozens of vehicles screeched to a stop outside the construction site. Flashing red and blue lights reflected faintly through cracks in the broken walls. The hostages gasped in relief, some even crying softly. Help had come. Moments later, the heavy footsteps of boots on concrete thundered through the stairwell. Voices shouted commands in sharp professional tones. SWAT had arrived. Daniel exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. He shouted up the stairwell, "Down here. We've got hostages and an injured officer." Within seconds, armed SWAT officers stormed into the basement, their weapons and shields ready. They quickly secured the rescued people, moving them toward safety. Medical teams rushed in to help the injured officer, gently lifting him onto a stretcher. The German shepherd tried to follow, whining, but Daniel knelt down and held its collar. "It's okay, boy," he said softly. "He's safe now. You did your job." But the dog's eyes stayed fixed on the stairwell, ears sharp. It knew the fight was not finished. SWAT officers quickly spread out, securing the underground rooms. Daniel and Mark joined them, moving up the stairwell with the dog leading once more. The building above was a maze of unfinished walls, scaffolding, and broken windows. It was the perfect hiding place for people who didn't want to be found. Flashlights cut through the shadows as the team moved from room to room. Every creak of wood and every whisper of wind set nerves on edge. Then, in one of the larger rooms near the top floor, they found what the criminals had left behind. Stacks of papers, maps, and electronic devices were spread across a table. Boxes filled with documents and unfamiliar tools sat nearby. It looked like the center of some operation. hastily abandoned when the suspects realized the police were close. Mark's eyes widened. This is more than a kidnapping. This looks organized. Daniel nodded grimly. We'll let investigators handle it, but this is the evidence we needed. Just then, another bark from the German Shepherd pulled everyone's attention. The dog stood near a broken window, growling at the darkness outside. Daniel rushed over and caught a glimpse of figures slipping away into the night, running across the empty lot beside the building. They're escaping, he shouted. 2 SWAT members bolted after them, but the suspects disappeared into the maze of shadows beyond the construction site. The chase was on, but Daniel knew at least some of them would be caught tonight. The net was closing. For now, though, the focus returned to the basement. The hostages were escorted out one by one, shivering but alive. The injured officer was rushed to an ambulance, his partner, the German Shepherd, trotting faithfully by his side. The crowd of paramedics and officers made way for the dog, treating it with the same respect they would a fellow officer. The police chief arrived shortly after, his face pale as he took in the scene. He listened as Daniel and Mark gave their report, explaining how the K9 had appeared out of nowhere, begged for help, and led them straight into the heart of the operation. When they finished, the chief shook his head slowly, his expression filled with both shock and admiration. If not for that dog, we might never have found them, and we might never have uncovered this. Reporters began to gather outside the construction site as dawn approached. The story was already spreading. A police K9 had saved its handler, led officers to hostages, and exposed a criminal network hiding in plain sight. Cameras flashed as the dog was led out beside its recovering handler. People clapped, some even cheering, as if the dog were a hero returning from battle. Daniel and Mark stood quietly, watching the scene unfold. Both were still pale from the night's events. The image of what they had discovered burned into their minds. But they also felt a deep sense of pride. They had trusted the dog, followed it, and because of that choice, lives were saved. The German Shepherd sat beside its handler, tired but proud, its chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. And though it could not speak, its eyes said everything: loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bond between a K9 and the people it was sworn to protect. The operation was not over. Investigations would continue. Arrests would be made, but one thing was already certain. This dog had changed the course of the entire case. The sun had just started to rise over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The flashing red and blue lights from the police cars still filled the construction site, but the worst of the night was finally over. The hostages were safe, the injured officer was on his way to the hospital, and the German Shepherd, the true hero of the night, sat quietly beside the ambulance, its eyes tired but alert. Daniel and Mark stood nearby, still processing everything that had happened. Their uniforms were covered in dust, their faces pale, but in their hearts they felt a deep sense of pride. They knew that without the dog, none of this would have been possible. It had risked everything to bring them here, to save its handler and the others who had been trapped. The chief of police approached them, his expression serious but grateful. "You two did good tonight," he said in a steady voice. "But let's be clear, this was the dog's operation. He saved lives." Daniel smiled faintly, looking at the German Shepherd. "We only followed his lead, sir. He's the real reason we're standing here with survivors." The chief nodded. "And the whole world is going to know it." By the time the morning news aired, the story had already spread. Cameras captured every moment. The brave K9 standing tall, its torn vest still hanging on its side, the rescued hostages being led out, and officers saluting the dog as if it were one of their own. Reporters described it as an act of loyalty and courage that no one would forget. At the hospital, the injured officer slowly regained his strength. Though weak, his first request was to see his partner. The German Shepherd was brought in carefully, its nails clicking on the floor as it walked straight to his bedside. The room grew silent as the dog gently rested its head on his chest, whining softly. The officer's eyes filled with tears as he whispered, "You saved me, buddy. You saved us all." Doctors and nurses who witnessed the reunion couldn't hold back their emotions. It was clear that this was not just a working dog. This was a true partner, a loyal friend who had risked everything for the sake of duty and love. In the days that followed, investigators uncovered the full scale of the operation. The construction site had been used by an organized network for months. Documents, electronic devices, and hidden records pointed to crimes far larger than just the hostages found that night. Thanks to the evidence, dozens of arrests were made across the city. The bravery of one dog had triggered a chain reaction that helped dismantle a dangerous criminal group. The city responded with overwhelming gratitude. Messages poured into the police department from people who had seen the story on the news. Children sent drawings of the brave dog with words like hero and thank you. Local businesses donated supplies for the K9 unit, and community members organized a small ceremony to honor the dog. Finally, a week later, the department held an official award ceremony. The hall was packed with officers, officials, families of the rescued hostages, and members of the community. Cameras flashed as the chief stepped onto the stage with the German Shepherd at his side. The dog's handler, now recovering but still on crutches, stood proudly beside his partner. The chief's voice carried across the room. This dog is more than a K9. He is a symbol of courage, loyalty, and hope. On that night, when no one else could, he fought his way through danger to bring us the truth. Because of him, lives were saved. Because of him, justice will be served. The audience erupted into applause. Some stood on their feet, clapping loudly. The dog wagged its tail slightly, almost shy under the attention, but its handler knelt down and gave him a proud pat. A medal of honor, specially designed for the K9 unit, was placed around the dog's neck. The chief saluted him, and every officer in the room followed. The sight was powerful. Hundreds of men and women in uniform standing tall, saluting a German Shepherd who had become their equal in bravery. Daniel and Mark watched from the side, their hearts full. Mark leaned closer and whispered, "I've never seen anything like this. He's not just a dog. He's a legend now," Daniel nodded, "and he earned every bit of it." As the ceremony ended, the rescued hostages came forward to thank the dog and the officers. Many of them were still shaken, but their gratitude was clear. One elderly woman, tears streaming down her face, knelt to hug the German Shepherd gently. "You're the reason I'm here," she whispered. "Thank you." The moment was captured by photographers and spread quickly across newspapers and television screens. The image of a loyal K9 comforting a rescued hostage became a symbol of hope not just for the city, but for people everywhere. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal for Daniel and Mark, but they carried the memory of that night with them. They would often glance at each other during patrol, silently remembering the moment when the dog had appeared in front of their car, begging for help. That single choice, to trust the dog and follow, had changed everything. For the German Shepherd, recognition came in many forms. He became a beloved figure in the community, often invited to schools where children learned about loyalty, teamwork, and courage through his story. His handler, now fully recovered, proudly stood beside him during these visits, telling students, "He's not just my partner, he's my family." At the station, the other officers treated the dog with respect that went beyond duty. He was given the best care, the best food, and endless affection. Yet despite the fame and attention, the dog never changed. Each day, he returned to his work with the same discipline and loyalty, always ready to serve. Months later, when the case finally closed and the last of the criminals were brought to justice, the police chief gathered his team again. He reminded them of the night it all began. "Sometimes," he said, "heroes don't wear badges or uniforms. Sometimes they walk on four legs with loyalty stronger than fear. And when that happens, it reminds us why we do what we do." The officers nodded, their respect for the K9 unit deeper than ever. On a quiet evening not long after, Daniel and Mark found themselves driving the same route where it had all started. The streets were calm, the night air cool. Mark glanced at Daniel and said, "Do you ever think about how different things would be if we hadn't stopped that night?" Daniel smiled faintly, his eyes on the road. "Every time. But I'm glad we listened. Sometimes the smallest signs can lead to the biggest discoveries." At that very moment, the German Shepherd, seated proudly in the back of the patrol car with his handler, let out a small bark, as if agreeing. Both men laughed softly, the sound breaking the silence of the night. The story of that night would be told again and again, of the dog who stopped in front of a police car, begging for help, and of the officers who trusted him. It became more than just a tale of rescue. It was a reminder of loyalty, courage, and the bond between humans and animals that could change the course of lives. And so, The legend of the brave German shepherd lived on, not only in the hearts of those he saved but in the spirit of everyone who heard his story. He had turned fear into hope, darkness into light, and danger into justice.